I'm Nadira Tudor, and obviously these sessions are in the forum, and I'll be hosting for the rest of this section of the day. So welcome. We'll be concentrating on the new era of industry through two panel discussions. The first one focusing on manufacturing foreign direct investment and its ability to accelerate and boost economic growth. More on that shortly. And our second panel discussion in the forum will concentrate on 4IR and effects on industrial policy and development. And that panel discussion will start pretty much in an hour, I think. Hopefully. We're of course tight on time, as you can see, and there's a lot to pack in. So we will give an opportunity, I think, for questions and answers of probably about 10 minutes per panel discussion. So please do contribute to that. We need your contributions as well as our guests. And a reminder that overall key themes at GMIS are how to expand to highlight the role of nature-inspired technologies, which you heard a lot about in the opening ceremony, the role of nature-inspired technologies and its impact on manufacturing, benefits to the communities, its role in advancing the sustainable development and sustainable development goals, SDGs, which are outlined by the United Nations. These are being explored through interactive debates, sessions, workshops over the next 3 days. So please do check and see what's going on. I'm sure there's something that you'd all like to either watch or participate in. I'm going to begin now. I'll hand over to your moderator for the next hour, Ryan Chilcote, Special Correspondent, PBS. And this is the first panel discussion of the forum. Please come onto the stage. Called Manufacturing FDI to Accelerate Industrialization and Boost Economic Growth. Enjoy. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Nadira. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first discussion, as she was just saying, of the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit. I was about to say, let's hear some noise, but yeah, there we go. We got a boisterous crowd. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. I'll point out this is the first discussion to ever take place in this hall. And it's pretty extraordinary, 5,000 seats in here. I'm impressed. I just hope that this being the first, that the Russian expression «Первый блин всегда комом» не относится к нам. I just hope that the Russians have an expression, the first pancake is always a flop. And I was saying I'm hoping that that's not going to apply to this session. My name is Ryan Chilcote. I'm a TV host, longtime business watcher. Delighted to be here in Yekaterinburg. Was first here in 1994. Good to be back. We've got some great captains of industry, I would say, with us today to share their real-life stories, thoughts, biggest challenges when they look at FDI and how FDI in the manufacturing sector can affect the speed of industrialization and economic growth. Allow me to introduce our three speakers today, beginning with to my left, His Excellency Jamal Salem Al-Daheri. Thank you very much for coming. His Excellency is the CEO of Senat. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about Senat as we have this conversation, the industrial conglomerate in the UAE. To His Excellency's left, Dr. Sergei Kravchenko, President of Boeing Russia. That's at least one of his hats. Sergei, thank you very much for being here as well. And finally, Marianne Popp, CFO of GE Russia, and also she has some other roles as well. Thank you so much for all making the trip out here from Yekaterinburg and here to Yekaterinburg. Marianne, if I could, let me start with you. You know, when you think about when GE thinks about FDI, you know, in particular, what aspects do you think about before making your investments?
So GE really is a truly global company, right? So we generate the majority of our revenues outside of North America. And we typically don't do this by just flying in and flying out, but we really look at building sustainable and substantial presence in local markets and having a truly global footprint, right? Now, the sectors that we're most active in, I'd say, energy, healthcare, are sectors where we see huge demand for enhanced infrastructure and therefore also a lot of demand for investment for FDI, right? And we strongly believe that in particular localization of those sectors directly contributes to market development and to economic growth, again in particular in developing markets. I'll give you a few concrete examples linked to what GE is doing here in Russia, for example. And GE's technology products and people here are really aligned with Russia's import substitution strategy, but also with GE's technology strategy. I think that's very important to stress that it's important to align with the country's objectives, but also with your organization's objectives, right? Here in Russia, we're working with several partners to develop leading and localized technology solutions for the Russian market, but also for export. And that includes local manufacturing of 80 megawatt gas turbines and our Russian gas turbine JV with Interrao in Rybinsk. We also localize marine propulsion systems at the Zvezda shipyard in the Far East. We're partnering on locally assembling healthcare equipment with MTL outside of Moscow. We're licensing high voltage equipment and automation solutions with Electroapparat in St. Petersburg. And finally, we're also developing cutting-edge digital solutions together with Rosneft to drive the digital transformation in the Russian oil and gas industry. So again, these are just a few examples, but they're clearly high priorities for the country, and we try to align ourselves with the country's agenda on these ones. Now, we do operate in 180 countries around the world, so we can't really do this in every single country. But the goal is certainly to always find the right approach for any given market in terms of what will work commercially, as well as contribute to the economic development of that market.
Thank you very much, Sergey. If I could ask you, Boeing, another American company like GE, would you say that that's the same approach you take as a company when you look at FDI? And what do you think about the whole term FDI? Is it a useful one?
Well, this is a term that's used very widely, and I think, what we consider by FDI is the investment outside of the United States when we try to leverage capacity, capability, global talent in different locations. And of course, the market access is also very important. That's why we're really big in China, India, Brazil, UAE, Qatar. But I would say that in Russia, the main motivation many years ago in 1992 was not the market access, because when we began to work over here after the Cold War, and we mostly were interested to leverage the unique opportunity and work with the former Soviet and now Russian engineers and scientists on the projects like International Space Station. So that's a true joint venture, 50-50. That was launched in the middle of the 90s of the last century, was sponsored by both governments. And we still enjoy this unique project flying on the orbit. And I had the privilege to sign on behalf of the company the extension of the operational contracts for International Space Station, because the Boeing company is the main contractor for NASA for this project through 2024, and we also opened the largest outside of the United States engineering center, leveraging the great heritage of the Soviet and Russian aviation industry. In Moscow now we have the similar facility in Kiev. We work with thousands of the best Russian and Ukrainian engineers that help us to design and support Boeing commercial airplanes every day. We went into a really big project here in Urals, about 150 kilometers from here, at a small town called Verkhnya Salda, with the largest in the world titanium company called VSMPO. We have two plants that we built over here, and we all these projects can call foreign direct investment, but it's just for us true business sense, making business case, making good business decisions. And when we think about the criteria to make these kind of decisions, I think, as I said, capacity, capability, global talent are very important, but predictability and stability is also very important, because we are in very long-term business. We sign contracts for titanium part supply and production for 15, 20 years. Our aeroplanes are, fly for 20, 25 years. International Space Station is in operation for 20 plus years. So stability and predictability, including political predictability, is very important for us. So it's also very important criteria when we make decision on so-called foreign direct investment.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, I promised to talk a little bit more about Sanat. Obviously, one of the UAE's largest industrial conglomerates, manages the assets on behalf of Abu Dhabi government. You've got 9 companies under your wing. One of the things that the UAE is focused on right now, and I know that you're part of this effort, is to drive investment, so this is a little bit different perspective, into the UAE to encourage FDI. Why?
UAE is very active into that aspect when it comes to FDI. They have been very clear on their agenda, what they are trying to achieve. They have put a lot of effort in order to make that happen. There's a huge growth, huge strategy going forward that it does require support from that point of view, and the involvement through FDI will tick a lot of boxes. UAE have been putting a lot of efforts when it comes to their infrastructure. They have enhanced, they have invested a lot when it comes to the port, airports, roads, highways, when it comes to, Khalifa Industrial Zone, Zones Corp, and all of that. There's a huge industrial landscape happening in order to attract all of these businesses and investments. They've been putting a lot of effort when it comes to the legislation, all the laws, exactly what is required for those investments to be very comfortable when they bring their investment in UAE. They have, in fact, put a lot of effort when it comes to the attractiveness environment, when it comes to the utility infrastructures and all of that. They've been putting a lot of packages in order to incentivize businesses. So they've been doing a lot from their side. From Sanat point of view, as we are an industrial player in UAE, we are very actively contributing to the UAE GDP in that regard, and therefore we have very clear agenda and strategy going forward in the next 5 years, where we have a sizable investment that we need to do. We've been capitalizing on FDI also to enable all of those investments and to be realized. In fact, we have a couple of examples that I want to share. Previously, we have done with Saatchi, Italian, and it was about $500 million that we have got in order to enable our investment in one of our subsidiaries, which is Emirates Steel. A huge investment that we have done, and we have got really a very attractive deal that enabled that investment and made it competitive. There's another investment that we have done also with our friend, the Japanese, JFE and Marubeni. We have done an investment of $250 million of welded pipe in Abu Dhabi, where we got a clear support from JBIC of about $111 million of a 14 years deal that we have got. So these things, what's happening to us is really, it shows that there's a clear trust from the outside environment of investors looking at UAE and what type of opportunity that they are there, and also they have a trust in regard to the whole and the full system within the UAE.
Thank you very much. Marianne, you're the CFO, so when you think about FDI, you obviously have to think about it from a financing perspective. How do you think about financing FDI investments in particular?
It's a key question, right? Because ultimately, with FDI comes the need for investment, comes the need for equity investment, comes the need for debt investment, and it can be a real challenge, right? Depending, again, where your investment is, in what part of the world, and subject to what rules and regulations and structures. But while we see globally a lot of capital chasing investments, it is difficult to find projects that really are well-structured, bankable, that can actually be financed, right? Both, again, on the equity side and on the debt side. So for someone like Saatchi or JBIC to actually come in, right, the project needs to be well-developed from an early stage onwards, really well-structured, and also ultimately sustainable, right, with a business plan that goes over 10, 20 years, and that can hold its own. And for us, that is very important because I think, as Sergey mentioned, FDI is for a company is a business proposal. There needs to be a business case behind it. So we really spend a lot of time looking at the economics behind the project, making sure we have the right structure, both in terms of the equity ownership, in terms of the debt financing. We spend a lot of time with our customers to help them find third-party capital as well. So it's not only GE investing, but it can also be us helping our customers find equity investors, raise debt from export credit agencies, from multilaterals, from the World Bank, from the Asian Development Bank, etc. So we also spend a lot of time as an advisor kind of helping people put together their financing structures, because ultimately that is essential to get these projects off the ground. I mean, you're looking sometimes at investment projects, in the range of 100 million, 200 million, 500 million, $1 billion, and it takes a special skill set to structure those.
You can't talk about aerospace and aviation without talking about long-term financing, can you?
Well, I think that when it comes to our business, when we make a really big investment in the country, even we're 100% private company, we cooperate between the largest U.S. exporter, the Boeing company, and the country. Let's take China, for instance. About a year ago, we announced and opened the completion center, 737 completion center in China. There were a few regions of People's Republic of China that wanted to have this facility, and the regional support was a little bit different in different regions, so that was an important part of the decision. In Russia, for instance, two of my largest projects are positioned in the 3 economic zones. So we operate, for instance, in the Russian Titanium Valley here in Urals, and we partner with a private company, the Sempor. We have a joint venture, 50% joint venture, 2 plants and 1 research and development center. But our partner for both companies, for the Sempor, the Russian company, and the Boeing company, 2 private companies, is the Russian government, because they announced and created the 3 economic zone, and they give definite benefits in terms of taxation, custom duties for companies registered in this special economic zone. And stability, predictability for the long term of these commitments is really important for our business case. The same applies to the Russian Silicon Valley called Skolkovo. We were the first foreign Western company that built and opened the large research and development and training facility at Skolkovo. We opened it 2 years ago. We were the first, but the agreement that we signed to do that was done during the state visit that President Medvedev at that time in 2010 paid to President Obama to Washington, D.C. So, this shows that all these projects are long-term commitments from private businesses, but also from the governments, and that's really important part of our consideration when we make big investments.
And you mentioned geography within countries, talking about competition within, for example, Chinese regions for your production facilities or for your business within China, and same in Russia. To what extent, it's my own question, looking at it from the outside, how much latitude do you have to actually choose? How much competition is there really? How much latitude do you have to choose the actual?
Well, I'm not an expert on China, but in Russia we always have a few options on locating our major projects. And, it's not a secret that we discuss these projects because they are huge. They are the largest contributors to the bilateral trade. They are very long-term. They are also, aerospace is a special area of business. It's not a secret that we discuss these projects with the very top of the government. So people who were on this stage just before us, Minister Manturov and the Deputy Prime Ministers, they are very much involved in this. And for my company, the commitment from the government to secure support, is very, very important because, in our business, stability and predictability, including political stability and predictability, is the key for the business.
One could make an argument that Russia has not been the most predictable place to do business over the last couple of decades, but...
Well, Ryan, I would say that, in aerospace, I can speak only for our sector, it was very predictable and it was very reliable partner for us. And all the projects that we've done over here, huge projects, whether it's International Space Station or the $18 billion titanium program, we have 35+% of titanium parts on our commercial airplanes made here in Urals. These long-term projects were pretty stable and very much based on the mutual respect, mutual trust, and they are 100% mutually advantageous. They are very good for Russia and not less good for Boeing.
Your Excellency mentioned your partnerships with Italian companies, Japanese companies. What have you learned? Have they, partnerships as a vehicle for FDI, if we're not going to be really generic, really general, from those two partnerships, have you learned that, well, actually, this works better than that?
Sure. In fact, I will just go back on these partnership to highlight one very important thing, is that the value addition that comes from the partnership is very important to be understood. What value you are bringing to the table. And as you said clearly, the know-how, the expertise, the knowledge when it comes to the marketing that it's very important. Depending also if it has to do with the IP also, very important for you to access very tough customers, especially when it comes to the oil and gas. There's a high requirement, high approval, and all of that. The beauty of this partnership is that you bridge that gap of knowledge. It's very important. Instead of you developing your own and you are spending a lot of money and effort, you are bridging that. The importance also from the way that Sanaat is doing their project is there's a huge effort that we put in order to make sure that the project is sustainable. So there's a lot of knowledge when it comes to that aspect. So when we are getting with our partners or involving any of the banks, FDIs and all of that, they're really trusting the way that we are doing that business because they see the amount of effort that we put in order to make sure that we have a clear understanding exactly what is the landscape of investment, the type of product that we are producing, the type of investment, all the enablers, the relationship, the market, where to buy and where to sell and all of that. So that's very important. And the way that we are doing, as I said, is that wherever we see an opportunity for a value-added product, which really does differentiate ourselves from the competition, which will enable the investment to come to the stream much faster.
Thank you, Marianne. How does GE think about partnerships?
So I think for us, partnerships are essential. And I'd say in two cases in particular. First of all, in emerging markets where we are just not local enough to know the ins and outs of the market, and we benefit from teaming up with a local partner. And then oftentimes in markets where the state is a dominant player in the economy, and you ultimately end up having to partner with a state-affiliated or state-owned entity. So we do both, right? I think what's very important for us as well in partnerships is to upfront structure the partnership in the right way. So sometimes it can be a 50-50 JV, but sometimes we also do 49-51 JVs or 51-49 JVs. Sometimes we do commercial licensing agreements. So again, not every partnership is structured the same, and we take a lot of, effort upfront to really figure out what hopefully the right way to do this is. I think one topic we've spent a lot of time with over the last kind of 5 years is public-private partnerships. It's a very fashionable subject, right? I think few people have done them successfully, but I think we see now a few examples where public-private partnerships are actually well set up, well structured, and more sustainable. We have invested in a few of them in Turkey, for example, in the healthcare space. There's been a lot of new build hospital projects where we have provided technology solutions, but also partially invested in those projects, and then again helped arrange the financing structure for these PPP projects. And I think it's a little too early to have the final verdict on those, but they look very promising.
Sergey, if I could ask you, politicians tend to talk about FDI on pretty short, well, even if they talk about FDI with the longer horizons, usually they're thinking about this year, next year, the following year, maybe a 5-year plan. What are the challenges around creating a successful FDI plan that stands the test of time, in part given the sort of politicians tend to take a short-term view?
Well, I think that we have different examples for 27 years that we actively work after the end of the Cold War here in Russia. We had different examples. Most of them were very successful. There were some not very successful. For instance, International Space Station, this is a 50-50 agreement not between industries, but between governments, because US government, NASA, and Russian government, Russian Space Agency, in the middle of the 90s agreed to build the International Space Station together. They selected the main contractors that happened to be the Boeing company on the US side and Khrushchev and Energia on the Russian side, and we developed unbelievable partnership for this 25, 27 years. We have Russian astronauts living for years in Houston, trained with American astronauts flying, for many, many months, more than a year on the orbit. And since 1996, when we launched the functional cargo block built by Khrushchev, managed contract by Boeing, and then we sent the services module built by Boeing in the United States, and they met each other on the orbit. And then we launched the international crew. Since 1997, we didn't have even one day when there was no one American citizen and at least one, sometimes two Russian citizens working hand by hand on the very high space orbit. And the space station with this international crew that depend on each other every minute flew over Yugoslavia, over the tragedy in 2001 on September 11th in New York, or over Georgia, over Crimea, Ukraine, and we hope that they will still fly, for many, many years working together. And it's a great example, but that's a partnership between governments, joint venture between governments. Now, when we began to work on another project, called Sea Launch in the end of the 90s. That was the first private joint venture between the Boeing company, Ukrainian, Russian, and Norwegian partners. And Boeing had a majority, 60% of this joint venture, and Norwegians had only 4%, and Russians had 20+, and Ukrainians had a little bit less. Now when we work here in Urals for almost 25 years on the Russian titanium project, and in the last 10 plus years on the joint venture called Ural Boeing Manufacturing, it's a 50-50% partnership. And when we talk about our engineering center, which is the largest outside of the United States, it's not a joint venture, it's just a pure contract relationship. We buy services from Russian and Ukrainian services engineering companies, and they provide us Russian and Ukrainian great engineers who design our airplanes, and we pay on the contract. So we have different models, but as I said before, what is really important in our business is stability, predictability, trust, and knowing capacity and capability. And that's the expertise that we developed in years, because we have a very large local presence in all international locations, and we'll continue to grow our international presence around the world.
Your Excellency, let me come to you in a second. I know, Marianne, you wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges for long-term FDI plan.
Sure, I think for us it's a big topic, and I'd just add to what Sergey just said, that I think trust is important, especially if you have a partnership, right? I think what's also very important is the structure you have around it, the framework, the regulatory framework, whatever the framework is that your partnership is feeding off, right? I think the investment will be most successful if there's a framework that lasts, for the 10 or 20 years the investment will be active. If you're building a wind farm, you want to make sure you have an offtake agreement or feed-in tariff that will last the course. If you have a hospital, you want to make sure that you have an offtake agreement. If it's a PPP, like I mentioned earlier, that will again last the duration of the investment. I think for investors to have that security that the rules of the game will not be changed on them partway through the investment is extremely important. But then on the flip side, I think also as the investor, as a company making the investment, you need to be able to stomach some ups and downs, right? I mean, if you're looking again at 10, 20 years, you're not going to have plain sailing every year, you're not going to have necessarily growing results every year, so you have to be able to live with the fact that you have made this decision for the long term. But I think between the investor kind of being willing to do that, and then hopefully the regulator, the government, the receiver of the investment, being able to keep a stable framework, that's really important from both sides.
I think, that you're absolutely right. When we work internationally, especially at the emerging markets, sometimes there is factors not under our control. Let's say, for instance, hard currency exchange rates. We didn't plan for ruble to jump up and down like it did, in the last 10 years. And yes, when it happened first time, it really hurt us, but as you said, it was a short-term bump on the road. We learned our lessons. We have very, very robust hedging, programs in place. It's different from doing business in the United States, but that's what it takes, to be a global champion, a global industrial champion. And Boeing wants to be the global industrial champion in aerospace. So we learn whether it's the Chinese or India or, Middle East or Russia experience. And, if we have a short-term challenge, it's okay, because we're in long-term business and we adjust and we go through this. What is really important when you work internationally is not to leave your partners at this kind of challenging times, because there were quite a few American companies and other Western companies that during the most recent challenging times in Russian economy, changed their course. And we never did. And that was noticed and that was appreciated. And we never wanted to. We want to go through this learning experience with our Russian partners, learn with them how to go through this. And of course, we pray that political environment will allow us to continue grow our partnership.
Let me ask each one of you a very quick question. Just take literally 15 seconds to answer, because then we need to move on to other stuff. But you mentioned volatility and unpredictability, and I could go through a zillion different examples of that are in the papers today. Trade wars, currency fluctuations. I mean, the lira, I think lost 3% of its value just a couple of days ago. This is not an extraordinary event anymore. We get this quite a bit nowadays. Just very briefly, each of you, unpredictability internationally on the rise, or that's just perception?
I mean, market is really dynamic. There's a lot of things that's happening. You cannot predict it. That's why the focus from our side is that you need to work a lot internally, okay, within your cost structure. Just making sure that you are in the first quartile, okay, you are more competitive when it comes to competition. That's one. The second thing is your market, you need to be having a diversified market rather than relying on one single market. You need to do that. So you need to work on that. Third thing, you need to work on your product mix, making sure that your innovation is always happening and you can really co-op with the change in the customer's requirement and all of that. That's very important.
Well, I think that it's a fact that the political and trade environment is very different right now. But in our business, we have huge responsibility for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of jobs in the United States and at the international locations where we work. Let's take Russia, and former Soviet Union. We placed here almost 500 airplanes. Half of the passengers that fly in this huge region fly on our equipment. And we have huge responsibility together with the CIS and Russian airlines for the safety of every passenger on board of this airplane. And it's our job to send a signal to the governments about how much we are responsible to each other. And in the industries like aerospace, let's take commercial space, there is multi-billion investments that were made by both nations into the exploration of commercial space together. I hope it will be not very much influenced by political disagreements. The best analogy for us is that we built together with our partners, let's say in Russia, a very reliable ship, and we left the port with international, very well-trained crew at the good sunny weather, right? And then weather changed. We have a perfect storm right now, but the ship is very strong and very reliable, and the sailors are pretty good, and the captains are very well-trained. So we hope that even would like to sail, during the sunny days, we will continue to sail together to the final destination to the extent possible, because we are in the business that is transparent to all the governments. And of course, we are in compliance to all the laws and regulations, but we also have a responsibility to send signals to our governments and our parliaments what is at stake. And I think in aerospace, whether it's Russia, China, or India, or Middle East, there is so much at stake that we will just need, during this very challenging weather, political and trade weather, over-communicate. So we have we trained our sailors to sail, but now they also train to be communicators, like you, Ryan.
Maybe. Naturally, I want to hear your view on that, and also I want to transition, if you wouldn't mind, into what role FDI plays in terms of developing supply chains. And while we're at it, maybe you could tackle the question of, if you're a business like GE and you're working in a country like Russia, and Russia isn't alone in this sense, that is bent on import substitution, well, they want to effectively substitute your imports. How do you find profit and benefit in that kind of situation?
Sure, I'll talk about the volatility point first. I think volatility objectively might not be on the rise, but we as a business certainly feel it much more because we are so much more global than we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? So by nature of what we do, which is basically provide equipment and technology for basic infrastructure, again, power, healthcare, aviation, right? By nature of that, we are active in all sorts of markets, over 180 globally. And by nature of that, the people that need electricity these days are in Libya, right? They are in Yemen, they are in all sorts of places where it's very, very hard to do business. And therefore, I think as a business, we we have to learn, to live with the fact that we're going to have a currency crisis today, and then a government overthrown tomorrow in another country, and then probably some security threats to our personnel in a third country, and we manage that nowadays as part of our day-to-day business. And as unfortunate as it sounds, but that's part of how we do business as usual. I think on the second part of the question. For us, the development of supply chains and sourcing strategies is very much linked to FDI, to localization, and to all that, right? Because ultimately, when you make an investment in a country, you also should think about localizing the supply chain, right? And developing local suppliers, qualifying local suppliers, and that gets you to that kind of import substitution point as well. We've been doing this for a long time. We have a very good example actually in Saudi Arabia, where we have about 7 or 8 years ago built a gas turbine repair facility, and over time we've qualified over 150 Saudi companies, including small and medium-sized enterprises. And nowadays it's the biggest gas turbine repair shop we have, and it actually exports the suppliers that we helped qualify and build up, export to Europe, to the United States. And it's a very nice success story of how you can really build a whole ecosystem around, a manufacturing facility, a service shop, a repair shop, or whatever you are creating. But it does take time. I mean, that story took 6, 7, 8 years to come to fruition, right? Overall, obviously, how do you make sure that, the import substitution doesn't end up in you being substituted, right? It's a tough one. I think, overall, again, we do most of our investment as partnerships set up for the long term, which typically means that we are in it as a shareholder, as a partner over the long term as well. And that typically enables us to kind of stay active.
Sometimes people think that to do business in a very difficult, unusual places is hard. But, we learn how to do that. It's a fact. Our markets grow in the places where we didn't do business before. So we have to learn. It's just, the reality. And we're doing this, with the maybe not very fast speed, but as fast as we can. But I would say that there are some locations, like Russia, for example, when it's 100% two-way street. For instance, when we began to work on the International Space Station, when it comes to some of the best management techniques or lean principles, our partners learn from us. But some of the unique technologies, like the docking mechanisms, for instance, they were developed in Soviet Union and in Russia, and they're the best in the world. And we still dock, the parts of the International Space Station using those ideas. Let's take the project here in Urals, related to the Russian titanium. This import 25 years later, after we first certified them, looks very different, because we brought the best lean principles and the best quality systems to this plant, because it's part of our certification. We certify Russian partners like we certify any suppliers. But, we never expected that we'll learn so much from a Russian metallurgist. We developed, quite a few titanium alloys, new alloys for the world, based on some expertise that we didn't have back home. So, it's a two-way street. And, in India, for instance, we have some of the best scientists working for the Boeing company that were born and raised in India, and they're our technical fellows, on the par with the best scientists that work back in Seattle and Chicago. So I think that, the globe, as Tom Friedman said, the world is flat and the globe is really small, and we can't operate anymore as human that we back in the United States know the answers to all the questions, especially when it comes to the international global business.
Your Excellency.
In fact, the way that we are also trying to face all of this is to enhance our capabilities internally. Therefore, for example, within a company, one of our subsidiaries called Ducab didn't have the expertise to produce nuclear cable, for example. okay, and never done it. But no, we worked in order to enhance our capability to get that certification, which took us a few years to work around. And we were able to supply a nuclear cable grade to our Baraka nuclear plant in Abu Dhabi, okay, with that certification and that cable to their door. And in fact, we were able to sell that cable to the Korean nuclear plant in Korea. And we competed among international players. So a local producer didn't have the capability, work on themselves, got it, and then they did not supply it only to local, they supply it internationally. And that's the way that we are doing it.
I'm curious about FDI in the context of a rapidly changing economy, global economy, Industry 4.0, move towards technology. When I think of FDI, I think of people building factories and stuff. Physical things. But in the future, I guess perhaps these physical things might be a little bit less important. How does the new economy change? How is that going to change how we look at FDI?
I'll take a stab. I think you're right. I think
is it massive? Is it a massive change or not really to how you think about FDI?
I think it's just starting, right? So it's a little hard to see how it's going to evolve. But I mean, I do picture a world ultimately where FDI is not only building a factory here or a power plant there, but it must be also, investing in technology, in software, in joint software development, in localization of software development. And we see that starting in our business, but I don't have a really good sense yet how it's going to evolve and how fast it's going to evolve. But we are certainly ourselves actively working on some joint projects, again, typically with a partner, to build customized digital solutions, around the industrial internet, around digital twins for machines, for power plants, etc. And we do that with partners in Russia, for example, but also in China, also in Saudi Arabia. And that's something that again, is kicking off, and it's a little hard to fast forward 5 or 10 years to see what it's going to look like. But I think that's where we're going.
Sergey, there's an academician in another hall in this building who's, as we speak, talking about how automation could destroy 49%. I'm sure you've seen his reports, 49% of the jobs in the United States. So at least he thinks that automation, industrialization, the way it's going is going to have a massive impact on the job market. I'm not sure we all agree with that. Perhaps few people agree that it's going to have such a massive change. But I put the same question to you about FDI. Are we looking at a big change in how it all works?
Yeah, I think, it's inevitable that the world goes to the digital economy. And whether it's automotive industry or aerospace, the services will be as important as the platforms, or maybe even more important. Look at what happened in automotive industry after Uber was invented, and it was invented simultaneously by American and Israeli smart young people. And as a result of Uberization, there will be maybe 2-3 times less plants producing cars, because utilization of car will be much, much higher than the car sold to individual customer. And
maybe less planes.
And the same, well, I wouldn't say less planes, but we're thinking about this very seriously. But the utilization, the aeroplane is extremely expensive piece of equipment and very complex. And the best utilization rates are for airplanes already, close to 80, 90% at the best airlines. And there is not enough of the airplanes. The commercial aviation grows on average 2.5 times more than the global GDP. There is a need for 44,000 airplanes in the next 20 years, and it's around $6.8 billion market. So we are not that much worried about the authorization. But what we worry about is that services is not less by dollars market in our business. $6.8 billion airplane market, OEM market, and about $7 billion services market. And we would like to be a big part of this. Last year, IATA reported, the International Air Transportation Association reported that we sold as the industry 4.2 billion tickets to the passengers. So there is 2.2 billion transactional customers for us, and they all fly in the tubes with the wings that produced only by 6 OEMs in the world. And the dream is that they will be living the digital life on the flight like they live on the ground. So somebody will make trillions of dollars on these digital services. And that's the future of our industry. So to be the global industrial champion, as our CEO and chairman Dennis Mellenberg says, we absolutely have to be the digital champion. And what it means in terms of foreign direct investment, that before we invested, to build plants or to build engineering centers, and now we will invest, I hope, whenever we will find really great ideas. We use Skype every day, right? Not many people know that Skype was invented by people who lived in the former Soviet Baltic Republic, and we have great incubators for startups in India, in China, in Russia, at Skolkovo. We began to work through Embraer partnership with Brazil. This digitization of the world will change the way we will, look at the foreign direct investment, because it will be, I think, more agile and more oriented on people with ideas and with great capabilities.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. How do you see the role of FDI changing over the next 5 to 10 years? And I should say, we started late, but I like to not finish too late. So we're already 4 minutes over. So perhaps you answer, and then if you would like to add something, either of the two of you, then sure. But then perhaps, unfortunately, we have to call it there.
Sure. As I said, FDI is very important. The world is going into a different arena at the moment. There's a lot of things dynamic and all of that. Of course, a lot of startup businesses need to be supported, which has no history, has no record of robust in terms of their business and all of that. So I think FDI need to have a different way of looking at those new businesses, where it can enable them, support them in order for them to come up to life, basically. And that's very important. We went through this exercise with a lot of FDI discussion and all of that, and it was very detailed, and that's good, for us, because it makes us comfortable. But looking at the new businesses, I think there should be a different view on that.
All right. Did either of you want to add some final comments, or should we leave it there? You've been
I think first of all we have to thank our excellent moderator. And also,
always a salesman. Thank you very much. Let's thank our panelists. Your Excellency Jamal Salam Al-Dakhari, CEO of Sanat, Sergei Kravchuk, of course, the president of Boeing, and what we didn't get into is also has a different hat in that goes beyond Russia with the business of fostering innovation at Boeing and leading that effort. Marianne Pop, CFO for GE, thank you so much for joining us. And please join me in thanking them for showing up here, and thank you.